They say that love is blind, but sometimes it takes a medical emergency to open your eyes to the truth. My name is Nathan, and this is the story of how a car accident revealed my fiancé's betrayal and led me to orchestrate the most calculated revenge I could imagine. Melissa and I had been together for 4 years when everything changed. We met through mutual friends at a party, and our relationship had developed naturally over time. She was charming, ambitious, and had a way of making everyone around her feel special. I was completely devoted to her, and I thought she felt the same way about me. We had been engaged for 8 months and were planning our wedding for the following spring. Everything seemed perfect. We had found the perfect venue, chosen our colors, and were in the middle of sending out invitations. Melissa was excited about the wedding, constantly talking about our future together and the life we were going to build. But life has a way of revealing truths when you least expect them. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in October. I was driving home from a late meeting when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into the passenger side of my car. The impact was severe enough to knock me unconscious, and I woke up in the hospital 3 hours later with a concussion, several broken ribs, and a badly injured leg. The first person I asked for was Melissa. I needed to see her, to know that she was okay, to have her there with me during what was the most frightening experience of my life. The nurse told me that they had been trying to reach her since I was brought in, but she wasn't answering her phone. I assumed she was probably at home with her phone on silent, or maybe she was out with friends and hadn't seen the missed calls. I asked the nurse to keep trying, confident that Melissa would rush to the hospital as soon as she knew what had happened. But hours passed and Melissa didn't come. By the next morning, I was starting to worry. It wasn't like Melissa to be unreachable for so long, especially when something serious had happened. I asked my brother Jake to go to our apartment to check on her, thinking maybe she was sick or had some kind of emergency of her own. Jake came back to the hospital with a confused expression on his face. He told me that Melissa wasn't at our apartment and that it looked like she hadn't been there all night. Her car wasn't in the parking lot, her side of the bed hadn't been slept in, and there were no signs that she had been home since the previous morning. Where was my fiancée? I tried calling her myself, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I called her workplace, but they told me she had called in sick that day. I called her best friend Sarah, but she claimed she hadn't heard from Melissa in several days. By Wednesday afternoon, I was starting to panic. I had been in a serious accident. I was lying in a hospital bed with significant injuries, and my fiancé had completely disappeared. I couldn't understand what could be more important than being with me during a medical emergency. That's when Jake suggested we call the police to file a missing person report. But before we could do that, Melissa finally showed up at the hospital. She walked into my room on Wednesday evening, nearly 2 days after my accident, looking perfectly fine but claiming she had been dealing with a family emergency and hadn't been able to get to the hospital sooner. She said her phone had been dead and she hadn't been able to charge it. I was so relieved to see her that I didn't immediately question her story. I was hurt that she hadn't been there when I needed her most, but I was willing to believe that she had a good reason for her absence. But as Melissa sat by my bedside and told me about this supposed family emergency, something felt wrong. Her story was vague and inconsistent. She claimed her aunt in another state had been hospitalized, but she couldn't provide specific details about what had happened or which hospital her aunt was in. When I asked why she hadn't called me or the hospital to let me know what was happening, she became defensive and said she had been too stressed to think clearly. When I asked why her phone had been dead for 2 days, she said she had forgotten her charger and hadn't been able to find one that worked. None of it made sense, but I was on pain medication and dealing with the trauma of the accident, so I didn't push the issue. I wanted to believe Melissa, and I needed her support during my recovery. But over the next few days, as I lay in the hospital bed with nothing to do but think, I began to notice more inconsistencies in Melissa's behavior. She seemed distracted and anxious, constantly checking her phone and stepping out of the room to take calls. When I asked who was calling, she said it was work or family members checking on her aunt. When I was finally released from the hospital a week later, Melissa was attentive and caring, helping me get settled at home and taking care of my needs. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her explanation for her absence during my accident didn't add up, and her behavior since then had been strange. I decided to do some investigating. I started by calling Melissa's family to ask about her aunt's condition. What I discovered was shocking. None of Melissa's family members knew anything about an aunt being hospitalized. In fact, Melissa's aunt was perfectly fine and had been at work all week. Melissa had lied to me about the family emergency. If she hadn't been dealing with a family crisis, where had she been for 2 days while I was lying in a hospital bed? And why had she lied about it? I began paying closer attention to Melissa's behavior and her schedule. I noticed that she was getting text messages at odd hours, that she was more protective of her phone than usual, and that she seemed to be going out more frequently than before my accident. When I asked her about these things, she always had explanations. The late-night texts were from work colleagues in different time zones. She was being protective of her phone because she had sensitive work information on it. She was going out more because she needed to decompress after the stress of my accident and her aunt's supposed emergency. But I wasn't convinced. 3 weeks after my accident, while Melissa was in the shower, I decided to look at her phone. I knew it was a violation of her privacy, but I needed to know the truth about where she had been during the most frightening experience of my life. What I found was devastating. Melissa's phone was full of text messages and photos from a man named Ryan, someone I had never heard of before. The messages were intimate and romantic, clearly indicating that they were having an affair. But what made it even worse was the timing of the messages. Ryan had been texting Melissa throughout the entire period when I was in the hospital. While I was lying unconscious in the emergency room, Melissa had been exchanging romantic messages with another man. While I was asking the nurses to keep trying to reach her, she had been ignoring my calls so she could spend time with her lover. The messages revealed that Melissa had spent those 2 days at Ryan's apartment, completely ignoring the fact that I had been in a serious accident and needed her. When Ryan asked her about the missed calls from the hospital, she had told him it was just work stuff and that she would deal with it later. Melissa had chosen to be with another man instead of being with me during a medical emergency. She had lied about a family crisis to cover up the fact that she had been having an affair while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. I was devastated, but I was also furious. Melissa had not only betrayed our relationship, but she had abandoned me during the most vulnerable moment of my life. She had prioritized her affair over my well-being, and then she had lied about it repeatedly. I decided that Melissa was going to learn that actions have consequences, and that betraying someone who loved and trusted her completely came with a very high price. The plan I developed was comprehensive and would unfold over several months. I wanted Melissa to lose not just our relationship, but everything else she valued: her affair with Ryan, her reputation, her financial security, and her standing in our community. Phase 1 involved gathering evidence. I began documenting Melissa's affair extensively, taking screenshots of her text messages, recording her phone calls when possible, and tracking her movements when she claimed to be going to work or running errands. What I discovered was that Melissa's affair with Ryan had been going on for over 6 months, starting well before my accident. They had been meeting regularly, taking trips together, and making plans for their future. Melissa had been living a double life, pretending to be excited about our wedding while secretly planning to leave me for another man. The evidence also revealed that Melissa had been using our joint credit card to fund her affair. She had been paying for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and gifts for Ryan, essentially making me pay for her betrayal. Phase 2 involved Ryan's existing relationships. Through my investigation, I learned that Ryan was not the single, available man Melissa thought he was. He was actually married with 2 young children, and his wife Jennifer had no idea that he was having an affair. I arranged for Jennifer to discover the truth about Ryan's affair with Melissa. I sent her anonymous messages with photographs and evidence of Ryan's relationship with my fiancé, making sure she understood that Ryan had been deceiving her for months. Jennifer's reaction was swift and devastating. She confronted Ryan, demanded a full confession, and immediately began divorce proceedings. But more importantly for my purposes, she also contacted Melissa directly. Jennifer called my fiancé and told her exactly what kind of man Ryan really was: someone who was willing to lie to his wife and children while pursuing an affair with an engaged woman. She made it clear that Ryan had been using Melissa just as much as he had been using his own family. Phase 3 involved Melissa's professional reputation. Melissa worked for a prestigious marketing firm that prided itself on ethical standards and professional behavior. The company had strict policies about personal conduct and how it reflected on the organization. Through my investigation, I had discovered that Melissa had been using company resources to facilitate her affair. She had been using her work phone to communicate with Ryan, had been claiming personal trips as business expenses, and had been lying to her supervisors about her whereabouts during work hours. I compiled evidence of Melissa's professional misconduct and sent it anonymously to her boss and the company's human resources department. The investigation that followed revealed not only the affair but also several instances where Melissa had violated company policy and potentially engaged in fraudulent expense reporting. Melissa was fired within 2 weeks of the investigation beginning. Her reputation in the marketing industry was severely damaged, and she found herself unable to find comparable employment. Phase 4 was more personal and psychological. I wanted Melissa to experience the same abandonment and betrayal that she had put me through. I began creating situations that would make her doubt Ryan's commitment to her and question whether their relationship was worth the sacrifices she had made. Using information from my investigation, I arranged for Ryan to receive pressure from multiple sources. His wife's divorce proceedings became public, damaging his professional reputation. His children's school became aware of the family situation, creating additional stress and embarrassment. His employer began questioning his judgment and reliability. As Ryan faced increasing pressure and consequences for his affair, he began to distance himself from Melissa. The exciting, secret relationship that had seemed so appealing when it was hidden became a liability when it was exposed to scrutiny. Phase 5 involved Melissa's family and friends. Melissa was very close to her parents and her sister, and she valued their opinion and support more than almost anything else. She had always been the responsible daughter, the one who had made good choices and built a stable, successful relationship. I began sharing information about Melissa's affair with her family, always framing it as concern for her well-being rather than accusations. I mentioned that she seemed stressed and distant, that she had been behaving strangely since my accident, and that I was worried about her mental health. I also made sure that Melissa's closest friends began to learn about her affair. I arranged for them to see evidence of her relationship with Ryan, or to hear about it from other sources. Melissa found herself increasingly isolated as people who had once respected her began to question her character and judgment. The final phase was designed to bring everything together in the most devastating way possible. I wanted Melissa to lose Ryan at the moment when she needed him most, and I wanted her betrayal to be exposed to everyone who mattered to her simultaneously. I coordinated the timing so that Melissa would face the consequences of her professional misconduct at the same time that Ryan's divorce became public and their affair was exposed to her family and friends. The confrontation happened on a Friday in January, exactly 3 months after my accident. Ryan's divorce proceedings became public knowledge when Jennifer filed papers that detailed his affair and its impact on their family. At the same time, Melissa's termination from her marketing firm became public when the company released a statement about her misconduct. Melissa's family learned about her affair when I finally told them the truth, providing them with evidence of her deception and betrayal. Her parents were devastated, and her sister was furious that Melissa had been lying to everyone who cared about her. But the worst blow came when Ryan, facing the complete destruction of his own life, decided to end his relationship with Melissa. The affair that had seemed so exciting and fulfilling when it was secret became a liability when it was exposed. Ryan chose to try to salvage what he could of his relationship with his children and his professional reputation, and that meant cutting ties with Melissa completely. Melissa came home that evening to find me sitting in our living room with her belongings packed and evidence of her affair spread out on the coffee table. She had lost her lover, her job, her family's respect, and now she was about to lose our relationship and the financial security that came with it. "Nathan," she said, her voice shaking as she realized the extent of what had happened, "we need to talk." "No," I said calmly, "we don't. You made your choice when you decided to have an affair instead of working on our relationship or ending our engagement. You made your choice when you decided to abandon me in a hospital bed so you could spend time with another man." Melissa tried to explain, to minimize her actions, to ask for forgiveness and another chance. She claimed that her affair with Ryan had been a mistake, that she had never meant for it to go so far, that she still loved me and wanted to save our relationship. But I had seen too much evidence of her deception, had experienced too much betrayal, to be swayed by her manipulation. You chose to be with another man while I was unconscious in the emergency room, I told her. You chose to ignore calls from the hospital so you could continue your affair. You chose to lie to me about a family emergency rather than admit that you had abandoned me during the most frightening experience of my life. The breakup was swift and final. The evidence of Melissa's affair and her abandonment of me during my medical emergency ensured that she had no moral ground to stand on. The engagement ring went back to the jewelry store, the wedding was canceled, and our shared assets were divided according to what each of us had contributed. Melissa's reputation in our community was destroyed. Word of her affair and her abandonment of me during my accident spread quickly through our social circle, and she found herself ostracized by people who had once considered her a friend. Her career in marketing was effectively over, and she was forced to start over in a new field with a damaged reputation. Ryan fared even worse. His divorce was expensive and public, costing him half of his assets and severely damaging his relationship with his children. His professional reputation never recovered from the scandal, and he was forced to leave his position and start over in a new city. Most importantly, Melissa and Ryan never got back together. The doubt and pressure I had created in their relationship, combined with the very real consequences they both faced, had poisoned their connection beyond repair. They had destroyed their existing relationships for each other, but they ended up with nothing. As for me, I focused on my recovery and rebuilding my life. The physical injuries from the accident healed over time, but the emotional trauma of Melissa's betrayal took longer to overcome. I eventually realized that her abandonment during my medical emergency had revealed her true character, and that I was better off without someone who could prioritize an affair over my well-being. I started therapy to help me process the trauma of both the accident and the betrayal. I learned to trust again, slowly and carefully, and I eventually began dating someone new. Catherine was a nurse I met during one of my follow-up appointments, and she was everything Melissa wasn't: honest, loyal, and genuinely caring. Catherine and I built our relationship on a foundation of complete transparency and mutual support. She understood the importance of being there for someone during difficult times because she had dedicated her career to caring for others. We took our time getting to know each other, and we made sure that our relationship was built on genuine love and respect rather than convenience or excitement. People sometimes ask me if I regret the way I handled Melissa's affair. They wonder if I should have tried to save our relationship, if I should have been more forgiving of her behavior, if my revenge was too calculated and comprehensive. But they don't understand what it's like to be abandoned by the person you love most during a medical emergency. They don't know what it feels like to wake up in a hospital bed asking for your fiancé, only to discover that she chose to be with another man instead of being with you. Melissa made her choice when she decided to have an affair instead of addressing problems in our relationship or ending our engagement. She made her choice when she decided to abandon me during a medical emergency so she could continue her affair. She made her choice when she lied to me repeatedly about where she had been and why she hadn't been there when I needed her most. I simply made sure she faced the full consequences of those choices. The woman who had wanted to have her cake and eat it too learned what it felt like to lose everything. The woman who had been willing to abandon her injured fiancé for the excitement of an affair discovered what happened when that affair was exposed to the light of day. Melissa got exactly what she deserved, and I got the opportunity to build a new life based on honesty, trust, and the knowledge that I deserved better than someone who would abandon me during the most vulnerable moment of my life. Today, Catherine and I have been together for 2 years, and we're planning to get married next fall. We've built a relationship that's based on complete loyalty and mutual support. We both understand the importance of being there for each other during difficult times, and we've proven that commitment through various challenges we've faced together. The best revenge isn't always a dish served cold. Sometimes it's simply letting someone discover that their selfish choices have consequences, and that the people they've betrayed are stronger than they ever imagined possible. Melissa wanted to have the security of our engagement while pursuing an exciting affair with a married man. Instead, she lost everything and learned that abandoning someone during their time of need reveals the worst aspects of human character. That's a lesson that has served her well in whatever life she's built for herself now. And it's a lesson that has served me well as I've built a new life based on honesty, loyalty, and the knowledge that I deserve a partner who will be there for me during both the good times and the bad. The affair that was supposed to give Melissa everything she wanted ended up costing her everything she had. And the engagement she was so willing to betray taught her the value of what she had thrown away. Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply letting someone discover that their actions have consequences, and that the people they've hurt are capable of moving on to something better.